Welcome and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Kerry Brox from the Asia Pacific Institute for Learning and Performance, and I have to apologise first up. I've got a tradesperson out the front doing water blasting and a builder out the back. So as soon as I finish my introduction, I'm going to mute myself and stay very quiet. So please bear with me. I'm not sure if you could, if you noticed from last week's, if you had a chance to watch the recording or if you were on there, but the feedback has been great. So part one of this session is available on our resources page. And as you know that a while ago, ILP did some research on the capabilities L&D professionals need now and in the future. And of course, diversity and inclusion featured very highly in that as well. So it's very important, not just for L&D professionals, but for everybody with the work that you do and the people that you connect with. So as I put my L&D hat on, we obviously need to be able to recognise the positive benefits of diverse backgrounds and ideas and methods, appreciate people's skills and their experiences, and also be able to adapt and understand different learning preferences and needs of our learners and the people we work with. So I'm really excited to hear about from today's panel. They're going to take a deep dive further into diversity and inclusion. So for now, I'm going to hand over to our CEO, Bill Gerard, and the host for today's session. Over to you, Bill.
Thanks very much, Kerry, and welcome everybody. As Kerry mentioned, this is the second part of the diversity and inclusion, the masterclasses that we wanted to do. And so welcome to that. I mentioned before that we do have live transcript going, so if you want to turn on your closed caption, you can go ahead and do that. The other suggestion I might have is, as usual, maybe mute yourself until we're starting to do some of the talking, just in case there's any conflict or noise and things like that. That would be appreciated. And for joining us. Last session we had was about understanding diversity and inclusion. And this session, we're going to try to talk a little bit more about embracing diversity and inclusion. And in thinking about that, it was a case of what do we mean by these things? And we had some big questions that we were going to answer. And so the idea of having a round table was really about the only way we could do it. And the time was never going to be enough to really embrace the whole subject. But I think we started to touch on a few really interesting things. We don't have all of the people that were involved in the roundtable last time with us this week, but we do have, again, a range of people that are going to be able to contribute to this process. One of the things I think that we found last week was, what are the barriers and what are the things that are in the way of us understanding diversity and inclusion? What we know is that there's such a big subject that really understanding it is almost impossible in many ways. But as a roundtable, we did discuss it, and some of the things that came out was quite interesting for me, because one of the things that came through was this idea of our own biases, the biases we all hold, which we all do, the ones we know about, the ones we don't know about. It's part of that process. Really, it's a case of our history and our life experiences that put us and make us who we are. And those come into the play when we start to deal with issues like diversity and inclusion. Other things we came up with was this, a lack of confidence or an appreciation of how to react in certain situations. You want to do the right thing, but you're just maybe not sure how to do it. Another key element was there is that diversity isn't always visible. We don't always see it, particularly when Andrew Mountford was talking about, for instance, things like psychological type. That's not visible. There are a range of different things. We're going to hear some aspects about that, I think, today, which is part of that process. And then another challenge that we face is a lack of clarity on what I should do, what we should do, what an organization should do. And so those were some of the challenges that I picked up from last time, and they're significant, I think. But I wanted to, before we sort of kicked off, I wanted to just ask the people with us today, what else? What are some of the other challenges you might have picked up on and that you would like to pull together? And really, anybody can come in and talk about that at this stage from our roundtable panel.
We all live in a bubble, and to the extent that you don't examine your own bubble, then you're unaware of what other aspects around you are happening. So unreflected life, as it were, would be one contributor.
Yeah. Okay. Ainsley, last time you spoke about ableism, I think it was you called it.
Yes.
Tell us a bit more about that, because I thought that was a really interesting connection.
Yeah. So basically, for people that don't know, ableism is just basically disability discrimination. So it's like sexism and racism. And so ableism has a lot to do with, I always frame it that we have ableism, which leads to inaccessibility, and that also then leads to exclusion. So that's basically in the short of it. Yeah, so I find that I'll just quickly relay a conversation I was having yesterday, just talking to, because I'm not in the L&D space, but talking to people, business owners in Geelong, and we were having a discussion about accessibility, and it basically goes back to that little bubble that we live in. There was that conversation about how accessibility is too expensive to do, so therefore people get excluded. And one of the response was because only a minority of people would need to be catered for. And yet people with disabilities, we're the largest minority in the world, 20%. So it was just it's a hurdle that we still need to get people over, thinking about that even though we're a minority, we are a diversity group, and therefore need to be included as well.
Yeah.
I've got a great L&D example about that, Ainsley, about
Yeah.
ableism leading to exclusion, and that's with digital accessibility. And it couldn't be more prevalent than right now, when we've all been experiencing everything moving to an online platform due to containment measures with COVID-19. And what has often happened is that people who have, with the best of intentions, and we're talking about this invisible versus what's visible, but let's try to put everything that we're doing online all of a sudden, where we haven't catered for people or thought about how we're going to do it. We're just going to throw it all online and see how it goes. And in the learning and development field, some of the materials that people have put online have inadvertently excluded people with disability. And I'm talking about people who use assistive technology, so people who use screen readers, people who have other assistive technology that means they can only use keyboard navigation. A lot of people don't think about that when they're designing their learning and development, perhaps their e-learning or PDF documents or their Word documents. But if they create something that somebody who uses assistive technology can't access, it's exclusion.
Exactly.
And we actually have web content accessibility guidelines. They're an international standard, and they've been adopted by Australia. And anyone who works for a government organisation in Australia is compelled to comply with those standards. So if we're not meeting those standards, we're breaking the law. We're actually breaking the law against disability discrimination. And it's that thing, it's, some people don't realise, and that's why it's happening. Some people realise and go, it's too hard, or I've heard, as Ainsley said, I've heard people say it costs too much. There's a lot of reasons why it happens, but that's not a reason that we shouldn't ask more questions and be more curious and adapt ourselves to do some more user testing that's more widespread, so we avoid that happening.
Exactly.
Yeah, good. Anyone else want to comment about any challenges or barriers that they see just before I move on to the next even bigger question?
Can I just add, that's just prompted me to think, Lyndall, that it's often, well, we don't know what we don't know sometimes, isn't it? So and I think, David, you refer it to as our bubble that we're living in. And just, the more that we have these conversations and raise the awareness, obviously that's going to help everybody.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, let me move on now, and I'm just going to move through the discussion. I'll get a few people to get started, and then everybody else can put in as well. Here's a simple question, and maybe self-obvious. Why is it important? Why is diversity and inclusion, and why is embracing diversity and inclusion important? I mean, what is the underlying real reasons for diversity inclusion for organizations, for me as a learning and development professional, me as an individual, me as an organization to be doing things. Let's start with Sonali.
Right, so we are answering why it's important to embrace it, right, Bill? At the moment. And I'd say Ainsley wrote a very nice saying in the chat box, and I might put some stuff there myself. If I think about it, this is something which is a one-liner, but gets the point across. If we are not intentionally including people, we are unintentionally then excluding them. And a lot of us would be quite, disappointed with ourselves if we thought we were excluding people, because we'd like to believe we are not. But then if we are not carrying the intention, especially as L&D professionals or people with influence on an organization's culture and practices, if you're not intentionally doing that, then we are excluding people. And, Lyndall and Ainsley came up with great examples and insight there. I also think if you're looking for numbers, for some people, the social justice side of it, or the moral rightness of inclusion is not sometimes as appealing from a profits and business point of view. So, no judgment there right now. But I'd say that there are various ways we can approach this. And as L&D professionals, look for numbers as well. Now, a very, very popular research, which has been shared numerous times by many people, has been the Mckenzie Research, which they updated in 2018, and they updated their numbers and their percentages, which essentially was that racial and ethnic diversity increases people's financial returns, or companies' financial returns, by 33%. And that's a whopping big number for a business, and 21% more financial returns for companies who are more gender diverse and who are serious about gender diversity. So not just having people with differences, but companies that have activated that. There's another one that I'd like to share, and then you can go into the details of it. Deloitte's research on the 6 signature traits of inclusive leaders also threw up some very interesting data on how diversity and inclusion plugs into business benefits, right? So if you're not seeing other kinds of benefits, well, here are numbers that affect the bottom line. And that's, your employees can feel 70% more, that's 70% more valued, more respected, like they belong, like there's fairness and there is safety at the workplace when leaders are more inclusive. So as L&D professionals, what's our role in helping leaders share that feeling of inclusion with a diverse team and diverse people, so that they feel all of those things, and there's a big chance they would. As an outcome of people feeling that, because we might say, oh, it's all about feeling good, what then? But there are business benefits to a team feeling safe, valued, respected, like they belong, like someone is listening to them, like they can be themselves. And that's in team performance, which as per Deloitte is 17% increase in team performance, 20% in the quality of decision making, and 29% in increase in collaboration. So all of those numbers are available both on the Mckenzie website and the Deloitte Insights website. So those reports are freely available. But for me, it's also about sharing the perspective that it is me as a leader making a very direct impact on how people feel, which has a very direct impact on how they produce what they're expected to. So it isn't just a feel-good idea. It isn't just social justice, however important that may be to many of us, but that it is businesses becoming more competitive and lasting longer and doing better and attracting better talent.
I love that. And I love the fact that there are measures out there that can be pointed to. What really struck me, if I understood you correctly, when you said 70% feel more valued, it isn't just the people who are in the minority, if you like, but what I'm saying is that when I'm in an organization that is embracing diversity, then everyone, for the most part, feels better.
Excellent point.
Because they're actually part of of an organization that understands that kind of thing and is embracing the diversity and seeking to be more inclusive. I think that's a really, really powerful message and a really strong answer to the why for a lot of organizations. What about others? Deb, within your organization, given the breadth of it and the nature of it, what's looking like for you there?
I've actually read those reports, so I'm aware of those numbers, and my role is to try and influence others to actually not only be aware of the numbers, but to do something about those numbers, because there is in my industry, it's almost incestuous. Like they don't even look outside the industry for new players to come in and work within the industry. So, that's really taking that lack of diversity to the lowest level. They want people that are exactly the same as them. And what has been interesting, when I have been able to encourage the odd franchisee or two to go outside of the industry to find team members, they have actually found team members that don't have any industry experience, but they have got transferable skills that they can bring in. And they've had super positive effects. Everything from increased sales to improved team morale within those stores. So it's something that I'm consciously aware of and working very hard to change within the organisation. But it is an uphill battle because of the lack of diversity that's sitting at the top of the tree or top of the mountain, I should say. So, I quite often describe the management team, board, etc., as 1985 white male, management style, and it's still sitting there, So I can't shove board members off the board table. I just have to try and educate them effectively. So that's what I'm trying to do anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, but I think about, beds, which is your business, and comfort. And yet I think so often you have, if you go into the bed store, you see different sizes, different shapes, different softnesses. But I suspect that many people who would be classified as disabled would be probably going to places like Independent and places like that where they can get the specialist services that they need. Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, look, I've raised that issue a few times with not only the group, but with individual franchisees, so the store owners. How does somebody who has an inability actually come in and try all the beds? How are you set up to actually help them? It's a little bit like the same thing I notice in supermarkets, and I know how I've worked in supermarkets, so I know how the shelves are all set up. If you're in a wheelchair and you can't reach the products that are, at a certain level, but they're the popular products and they're the ones you want, how do you get them? So the shelves are all horizontal, whereas perhaps we should be going, the shelves should all be vertical, so the product is from low to high, not left to right, and it's that sort of thinking, I think, that needs to be changed in a whole lot of retail environments.
Yeah, I'd like to just say something to that. It's interesting. So I had a conversation because I had an idea about the whole shopping thing, because when I go into a store, if I can't reach anything up the top, because I'm also a wheelchair user, I just don't bother. I'll just reach what I can. So there was the idea of, I had an idea of shelves that rotate, for example. So press a button and the shelf that you want will come down so you can actually reach stuff. So I had a conversation around that, and then another interesting part about that came in. So the conversation about, okay, so who pays for that? And so, like, do shop owners pay for that? And why they should bear the brunt of that expense. So that's an interesting one as well, because that's definitely an inclusion issue.
Mm. But they could very easily just shift product and run them vertically instead of horizontally, so that you can access the product no matter what height you are, whether you're short, tall, in a chair, not in a chair, it doesn't matter. That to me is just logic.
Right.
But then, you know, I'm female and think differently to some of the.
So that's an interesting way of thinking. I hadn't thought about that one either. So that's interesting. Yeah.
There you go. And of course, so we're asking this question about, you know, why is diversity and inclusion important? And Sonali's given us some great numbers there, that input that, you know, when an organization is more diverse and more inclusive, it affects everybody. Everybody feels better about it. And I think those are some of the things we're seeing, numbers as well. What else might we see in terms of why it's important?
Yeah, folks, Bill. I'm happy to add some thoughts there.
Please.
And yeah, just around look, there's many elements to why it's important, and some have been mentioned. It's a sense of the fairness and all of those types of things. But just from a large organisation's point of view, so maybe the possible excluders sometimes inadvertently, even by the where they advertise and how they advertise. If they are able to advertise so everyone can apply, there's a bigger pool there, and they're going to get the very best talent. So by inadvertently excluding somebody, they just haven't got the best talent pool. So that's the bottom line business type thing that might resonate with large organisations. Who have we missed out on because of our practices when we're not getting out to every person in the community? We haven't enabled them to be even, they don't even know that, you know, that there's job roles here.
Yeah, okay. Nice.
Bit of Townsville City Council for many years there as a corporate trainer, and I know that they thought very long and hard about traditionally where they would advertise and how they would expand on that, so they absolutely captured everyone that wanted to apply. And I think even to go as so far as even in the parks and gardens and that type of thing, to making sure that there's equipment for you know, for everybody to be able to access and use, and that might have even been going a little bit to what Annalise was talking about before with that possible examples of, you know, it's going to cost too much. Well, there's a community obligation, particularly from local government authorities, to make sure that that's actually budgeted. So it's not something that comes up later. That's par for the course. That's establishing those practices, and that's the accessibility part, and the people part with employment, which I was involved with, making sure we get to people that way.
Okay, thank you. I want to dig just a little bit deeper on this before I go on, because I've asked the question, but why is diversity and inclusion important? What I'd like to know is dig a little bit deeper to our audience, which is learning and performance, learning and development professionals. Why should it be important to us as a focus area, as an industry, learning and development professionals? Why should this be important to us?
Opens so many doors, doesn't it? So opportunities. So if we're partly opening some doors, that's not what my brief is anyway, in this organisation even.
Yeah.
So need to open every door.
Okay.
And I guess if it's not starting with us as learning professionals, where are people going to learn it from? So it should just be incorporated as a natural part of our role when we're teaching groups.
Yeah, I think that's right. One of the things I've spoken about before with the whole purpose of these two sessions was for learning and development professionals to both embrace it because of the need to do that for the different audiences we have. And I'm going to come to context in a couple of minutes. But the other thing is that we're influencers in so many ways with the people we talk to, the organizations we work with, the hierarchy and senior people that we influence by getting them to work with us. And picking up just briefly upon what you said, Todd, I think is that if you're an L&D professional that's in this area and you're looking to work with organizations that are embracing this, you're going to be more attractive to them in many ways. I think that that's probably something else. Is there anything else? That we
Another
can...
issue.
Go ahead, Gail.
Sorry. And another issue is that it's not necessarily the words that we speak that are really important. It's quite often our actions and just the way we behave. I heard a poem years ago. I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather one should walk with me than merely show the way. So it's actually what we do even more than what we say. So we need to make sure that we're embodying inclusion in everything that we do, even just in the way we set things up and how we go about setting things up.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything?
I was just going to say, I totally agree. I think what you hit the nail on the head, Bill. We're influencers, and then Gail, we're role models for what we're doing. And you know, people, when you're in the front of the room, you know, as sort of an expert or a facilitator with the topic, you have that credibility, and it's really important. And people listening to you, that we are sort of demonstrating that. And what I was thinking about before about the diversity and stuff, I still know a lot of trainers that have their workbook on their shelves, and every time they run the program, they grab that workbook off and then just run the same program as they do every time. So to me, that's not taking in consideration of the learners who are our priority and our focus. And we need to really make sure that what we're delivering, that we help improve their performance, and we recognise what their individual needs and experiences and what they want to get out of the program. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to, at this stage, we're going to have a poll. I think, given the numbers, I think we might still do it, but then we'll put up a little bit and see how we go with that process. So I just want to put up a quick poll for people to have a question, and it comes around the question of the challenges, I guess, and why we're doing it. And so I wanted to ask this question because this group of people works with organizations of different sorts. So here's the poll, and I'm going to launch it now. And it basically says, do the organizations you work with have clear policies on diversity inclusions? And you can see some of the answers there. And you know, it's an open answer kind of thing. If you can answer it, that would be good. And of course, I've put 2 in the bottom in case you actually work inside an organization. I've got 6 of 9. Carrie can't vote because she's a co-host, so I will un-co-host her. All right, I'm going to end the polling now. Let's see what happens. Can you see the results? Yes? It's interesting, isn't it? What do you think? Do you think that would probably be reflective of if we had 30 people on with us today? I suspect so, eh?
Yeah, it's a good question. Hey, I'm curious too. Speaking of inclusion, I noticed Shirley's on her iPhone, and I wondered, does the poll work on the phone?
Don't know. Shirley, can you tell us, does the poll work on the phone? Can you even see it?
Yes, it does. I've answered it. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Okay. Now, see, we learn something new every day.
I didn't know until I tried it if it did or not.
Well, that's good. We now know about that. So again, it's very interesting. Some, but not many. And the other thing about it is I put in that question about I really don't know, because I think oftentimes we really don't know. We're a learning development professional. We really don't know very much about the organizations we're working with. And I think one of the ways we could start to embrace it is by learning more about what the organizations are doing. And by doing that, we can probably relate to them better, which I think is also something that could be quite important. for our benefit as well as for those we're working with. Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead, Samantha.
What also happens sometimes, and I thought that I'll just butt in quickly and say that for people who also listen to this later, that at many organizations, especially if they're larger, the L&D sits separate from the D&I function. There are two teams who surprisingly don't communicate very well with each other. And I do hear firsthand about these disconnects, and I have been part of them myself. And it's a bit disconcerting because and a bit confusing because you think that both those entities would talk to each other and that it's a natural fit. But a lot of times L&D professionals, and on our poll, we got that 11% of don't know, also comes from that it's not in their hands a lot of times. They're not getting the messaging, and they might get the blame when things don't work out, but they don't have enough information on what other parts of the organization are doing.
And do you see that D&I is part of the human resources function, or is it separate from that again?
Loosely connected, often reports directly to a senior leader who would be the executive sponsor. So that person may supersede your CHRO, if you might have one, or an HR director. And so sometimes it's also that disconnect of influence and authority, like who are you reporting to, whose accountability is it to oversee this thing? Or at times we go the other way and make it entirely the HR's problem, but the senior leadership is not as interested. So now you are supposed to be inclusive down the line, but you don't get inclusion from the top. So there are a number of reasons why people don't know what exactly is happening.
Yeah, it's about communications and understanding, isn't it? Which is one of the big barriers that we've seen. Okay, go ahead, David.
There's another option in that set of choices you had, which is I'm reasonably confident that none of the organizations I work with have much to do with D&I at all.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case, yes. Which is then interesting, isn't it? Because it comes down to us, and Carrie, maybe this is part of our capabilities where we talk about courageous consulting, where we got to choose who we work with in some cases as we move forward. So some interest, this is like a can of worms. We open it up and it just gets bigger and bigger, and I'm about to make it even bigger with my next challenge to you, because one of the things I've been thinking about as we delve into this whole subject of diversity and inclusion, and last time we spoke about, there's 8 billion people in the world. Every one of them is different in a dozen different ways. So the permutations of diversity is endless. And to me, it will be impossible to be able to embrace or even understand every type of diversity, to include every type of individual for a whole raft of reasons. Therefore, again, and I'm coming back to L&D professionals, but it could be for anything. I have to probably work in the context that I work in, with the audience that I work with the specialties that I have. So I think probably the only practical way of embracing diversity and becoming more inclusive is to understand the context within which my world works around, and being, it's the old story of, you have that sphere of influence that you have. There's the things you can control, the things that you can influence, and there's the things that are outside your control. I think diversity and inclusion probably fits there. What do I have control of? What can I influence? And then the other area that there's no sense in me spending time on areas of diversity that I have no way of impacting. So I wanted to just maybe go around and again, talk to different people about the world that you work in. What is the context for diversity for you? And also, as we explore that, how might other L&D professionals learn about this and develop their own understanding of the context within which they work? And I'm not sure where to start with it, but I'm thinking, Gail, I might start with you if we could.
Okay, well, mostly at the moment I'm working in the aged care simplifying space. So I'm either doing consultations with families in their homes, or I'm doing workshops, like I'm running one for a local library on Saturday. So in that space, I have to make sure that everything's accessible and that people are comfortable, but I also have to make sure that I'm speaking to them on a level that they can understand when trying to explain some of the government systems is quite complicated. So I need the visual feedback of whether people are actually still on the same page. And if they're not, and I just keep ploughing on with my content, then I'm not being inclusive. So I guess with my work in what I'm currently doing, it's actually the visual cues that I get from people as to whether I'm being inclusive by giving them the information at a speed and in a language in which they can understand it.
That's really
Is that
interesting.
relevant?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's a big question. So it just strikes me, I'm just remembering back now a bunch of years ago when Jennifer and I were working with Nerita Blair in the Aboriginal environment. And one of the things that Nerita was doing was looking at all of the regulations and things that were put together for the Aboriginal communities to understand. And there's all this government detail stuff. And of course, none of it could be conveyed to anyone. This is sort of what you're talking about in terms of the language. And Nerita was, like us, a passionate mind mapper, and she found that using things like mind maps and visual maps was a way to communicate to the mob that she would be working with and things like that. So it was an interesting thing. That just came back in my head as you were talking about that. But
well, that's actually kind of relevant. A guy who runs Aged Care Management Australia, who's based here in Adelaide, excuse me, has just done a contract for the government in Aboriginal lands up near Cape York, where things were going wrong with their aged care sort of services and whatever. He spent several months up there just analysing what's going wrong and then implementing plans for how it can go right. And apparently they've made huge inroads, but it was because he spent touching what was going wrong, because we were trying to make that community fit our system. So sometimes it takes an intensive look at how we can tip our system upside down so it meets another culture's needs.
context for someone else, Todd.
Yeah, well, geez, what a great question. So got me thinking, didn't it? On yeah, what am I doing myself? And a couple of things come to mind. You're so right. I love the circle of control, circle of concern. It reminds me of a saying: everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to help mum with the washing up. So it is really sometimes about when I'm in that room, when I'm with people, what am I doing and what feedback am I getting? And I've been involved with Indigenous Apprenticeship Program for 4 years with Department of Human Services, Dulmiji. I'm working with selectability, mental health, wellbeing, and suicide prevention. It's a great question, and I need to go away and reflect. I think I do that, but what a great question to keep asking yourself, because you really, the other thing comes to mind, think globally, act locally. So yeah, I think I'm doing a lot in my position, Bill, at the moment with frontline stuff. And then you're right, it's about influencing then, and that's joining these forums. It's about learning more, isn't it? That's what you might do to continue to build your knowledge of that inclusion for people. Just a very quick one, if I can, and that might be how you influence. I was in the States a couple of years ago, and another fellow on the training course was from India, and he said, "Oh, Todd, you're not like all of the other Aussies because they love cricket. You seem to be so calm and relaxed." He was thinking that we were all aggressive. And, so that's perception from another perspective as well, isn't it? But then he said, "So you travel around a lot. Are you ever," I don't think if he said scared, ever worried where you go? And I said, Not particularly. I'm just very interested in everyone that I meet, no matter, because I'm wanting to know more and I'm wanting to learn. And I'm excited by that. I think I might have used those words. So we had great conversations over the period of 3 or 4 days. So I learned a little bit about perception of, from some folks on what we were doing. But yeah, great question. And I think maybe my inner circle is, I think, okay. That's a self-analysis. I think your circle of influence is a good one, just to get me thinking, Bill. And I'm going to commitment to myself to keep doing that by coming to these types of things and hearing stories from others on here.
Sonali, did you want to say something? You unmuted yourself there.
Oh, I was responding. I can share a tidbit, but I was mostly also beaming all over the screen because Todd said cricket, and I just lighted up because nothing to do with anything. I love cricket, just saying. My context is a very divided context as well. And that's because, and it can be divisive because I work in corporates. I work with corporates rather as an independent consultant. Sometimes I'm wearing my L&D hat and sometimes I'm wearing my D&I hat. And I would suggest that we reflect on perhaps treading with compassion instead of treading with caution. Now, there is some caution required when sides are divided, when people are very strong-minded about what they think is happening when we talk of equity and equality or inclusion, and what the reality might be. So recently, case in point, I did a session on privilege and understanding it, using it for good, specifically white privilege and white male privilege to a room full of mostly white men. So that is a potential landmine for a lot of things to go wrong. But I have to say, I had a bunch of very mature, learning-oriented white men and some women, thankfully, as well. But I took the approach of treading with compassion. And I find that in my context, it's very important to not just empathize with people like me, who are people of color, in a predominantly white country and who are in minority, as well as I'm a woman, or empathize with any other minority group, but also take into consideration the fears, anxieties, the doubts, and some of the cynicism and even anger that you have from people who are in majority, who may not always get the right messaging on why what's happening is happening. Why is it important? Is it a reactive thing the company is doing to look good in front of its shareholders and customers, in which is the best way, the fastest way to get to cynicism and inaction on D&I. And so I have realized that empathy and compassion really help, so that I ask everybody, how do you feel about this? What's going on for you? What would you do if you had the choice to volunteer on this? Because a lot of people don't want to be told to come on board, but they feel much better when they volunteer to come on board and contribute as a mentor or as an ally. So that's the context I work in as well. That's how I manage it.
Good. Could I go to you, Lyndall, because you have a particular passion in the accessibility area, but not just ramps and stuff like that, but much more in depth, I think. And the context within that you work within. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe how you got into that context of where you focus yourself?
I'd love to, and I'd also love to acknowledge what Todd and Sonali just said and say, and sort of leverage off that and say, I think it's because as L&D professionals, why we're even attracted to be L&D professionals in the first place is because we have an innate curiosity, and we tend to want to know, and we tend to want to find out, and we tend to want to embrace all the things that are around us, and we can't help it. We're a bit passionate about that. And so that's the reason that I've ended up sort of in a niche area. But because I happened to meet a wonderful individual, and it's not just this one instance, by the way, it sort of happens for a lot of reasons, but in particular, I met one individual as part of my testing work for an e-learning course when I was working for an organisation. I asked her to come and test our e-learning as a user because she's a screen reader user. So she's somebody with lived experience of disability. The way she accesses any of her information, by the way, she's a doctor, so she's very well educated. The way she accesses information is by using screen reader technology, and in particular, JAWS software. So meeting her and working with her and watching her interact with learning that I thought was accessible was an eye-opener. And it was a difficult learning experience for me because I thought I was being inclusive. But what I found out is that there were so many things that I didn't know because I couldn't be expected to know them because I don't use that software. And it really opened my mind up to making sure that when we're doing user testing, that we're actually being widespread about the net that we use and not just going to the people in our team or the people that we think might be our learners. And so working for the NDIA, you know, there were people all around me, I was very lucky to work in that environment with disability, who were high achievers, who were doing great things, but often they were prevented from doing those things because of the world that we created around us. So it's become a passion of mine to include everybody, and particularly having worked alongside people who were missing out and being excluded, I really want to make sure that we think about them. And e-learning is a great example for L&D because we make an assumption that when we buy off-the-shelf authoring software, that it works and it's accessible. And the people who produce this software will tell us it is. But what they don't tell us is when you design using this software, you also have to have an accessibility mindset. And if you don't use it, you'll inadvertently create things that are inaccessible and people won't be able to use them. So yeah, that's how I've ended up there, because I've worked alongside people and seen it and gone, goodness me, we can do better than that. And it's helped me delve in to find more and more out. And for anyone who's not familiar with digital accessibility guidelines, I might put a couple of links in the chat about the federal government disability and digital service standard criteria that includes accessibility for people with disability. But also some other things like accessibility statements that you might like to refer to, because sometimes people don't know where to start. It's like, I don't know how to do a digital accessibility, but there's some really good guidelines out there, particularly by the ABC. So I might put a couple of those in the chat for people to refer to.
Thank you. That'd be really valuable, particularly as I'm thinking about our next masterclass on the 10th of March, where we're going to actually be looking at the development of e-learning in terms of, you know, we've pivoted this so far this year from face-to-face to virtual instructor-led, you know, Zoom-based stuff, and we've been able to do that. But in the longer term, it's going to be having to produce really engaging, fully online learning as a part of what I think is going to be expected. But then it's got to fit with the stuff that you're talking about, Lyndall, as well. And again, it's one thing to put something online using some simple approaches, but if you're not actually thinking with the strategy in the head of what the context is that you're trying to reach is going to be really important. So that's something that's really interesting for me as well. The other thing, I guess, just a quick question is, when we think about the context within which we work, and sometimes we choose that context, other times we're thrown into it, and therefore we have to adapt to it. And is there times when I think we sit back and we say, that area is something I can't work in, I can't adjust to that? And the reason I'm thinking that is that a bunch of years ago, MindWorks had a big 5-year contract with a big international organization teaching creative problem solving skills throughout Asia. And initially I was running all of those courses, but then there became so many that Jennifer started running them with me. And then eventually she would run them in one place and others. And what I found is that in some countries, my style just didn't work with the audience, whereas hers worked beautifully. So what we did is we tried to understand the audiences that we had, the participants we had. And so for me, Hong Kong or Singapore or Shanghai were fine. But if I went to KL or Taiwan, they were quite different than the other ones. And so we get this diversity. You think of Asia, well, Asia is diverse. And so I made the choices to not do certain things because that didn't fit with me. And I think that's also something that you got to take on board. Would you agree with that, some of you? Yeah, I think it's being brave enough to sit back and say, I'm not the best answer for that group, for whatever reason it is, whether that's a diversity or inclusion issue, but for me, it's part of that process. Anyone else want to talk a little bit about their context? What is the context? In other words, what kind of diversity do you come across in the work that you do? What kind of diversity do you come across in the work that you do?
I guess for me, basically in the disability space, when we talk about accessibility, it's just so huge. Like for the stuff that Lyndall does, for example, even though I'm a person with a disability, I'm still learning that stuff because that is so huge. But then, and again, like with accessibility, like we talk about the ramps, etc., because that's the first thing that people think about wheelchair users. But then there's also like thinking about accessibility from the perspective of people who are neurodivergent, and so therefore things like barriers to for example, the environment, such as sound, light, all those kind of things. So yeah, there's all those things to think about as well. And I mean, I can only do a certain amount, and I always consult with other people who specialize in those particular areas because there's just so much to know.
Yeah, I was just interested, and Neil's dropped off by the looks of it, but the students that he works with from around the world, and I know myself having 15 years of lecturing in a number of different countries, but also you get that diversity of there and how you relate to that and the styles that are approach things. So it's understanding, I think, that the context within what you're doing and then pulling it together and making things happen. Guys, I want to do another quick poll if you like, and again, this one will be a little bit different, I think, than we might have had if we had a pile of purple, but this one is, oh, sorry. All right, can you see that poll? How much have you built diversity and inclusion into the programs? I'm expecting a fairly good or a better result than we might get from a general audience today, but how do we feel about this? Okay, all right. Probably not unexpected results, if you can see them there. And it's one of the things, the reason I worded this up the way I did is some, but probably not all or enough, is one of the questions I have when we do the learning and development capability framework. There's the question, one of the questions that's being asked is around diversity and inclusion. And I always sit back and say, well, when I think about all the different people I've worked with in all the different places, I think I've done okay, but then I feel there's just so much I haven't done. And it's one of these questions that says, how much more can you do in some cases, which is why I came back with the context question about pulling it together. And I think, a couple of people that says have inclusion as a design requirement, I think that's probably where we try to get to in some of our processes. That's where I would be hoping we might see ourselves move forward to as well. Anybody want to comment on those results?
Yeah, I just want to say that, you can have the greatest policy and everything. And I'm one of the people who tick that one saying, yes, it's a design requirement that inclusion and diversity is part of everything that I do. However, I also take a deep breath and say that we're all individuals. So, stereotyping one particular niche and saying everybody in this niche needs everything delivered in the same way is dangerous. So I think if we're just constantly always asking ourselves the question, and what happens if this, and who is my real audience? And we just keep asking those questions, we we're never going to fully meet everyone's needs all of the time, but we're possibly going to have a better chance than if we make assumptions or stereotypes.
Yeah. Lyndall, I was just thinking that with your monthly meetups that we have, there's a lot of designers in that group of yours. It'd be interesting to see how many of them have a question around that they've built diversity and inclusion as a design requirement into the work they do, and get some feedback, because that's where it starts, I think, in many cases. That's where it sort of starts to hit the rubber on the road, where it starts with the awareness, I think.
Yeah, there's a topic for the next one. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And if for anybody that wants to join that group, just connect with Lyndall. It's a terrific group once a month, and not dissimilar to our, well, very similar to our member lounges, but has a strong design aspect to it from people from a wide variety of areas. So have a connection to that. I highly recommend it. All right, guys, I want to move on and to the next level, and that is, as L&D professionals, I think we agree we need to build more understanding of ourselves, of what diversity and inclusion is, and start building it more into what we do. And so what I wanted to do is maybe get just a few people talking a little bit about what they do. And then I want to have a quick poll, and then I'm going to ask Leonie, because I asked her to prepare something for us, a discussion, share some examples about how one way that learning and development might do something. So, because I think it's one thing to be, you want to do it, but how do I do it? How do I actually create something or design something that is truly inclusive? And I think Lyndall's lesson there about, you got to test it with the audience that you're trying to reach, or even beyond the audience that you think you're trying to reach is an important one. But what are some things that you've done specifically to build in diversity and inclusion and into the design or the way in which you facilitate some of the things you're doing? Deb, can you talk about that at all?
I'm just trying to think of specific examples. I mean, I in a face-to-face workshop, not that I've run one for a little while for obvious reasons, I do it automatically, and that comes back to the way I grew up. I had diversity all around me, from ethnicity to disability to gender preference. That was the environment I grew up in. So none of those things were challenges for me. And when I'm in a face-to-face workshop, I do it instinctively. I just have that inclusivity come through. But I'm trying to think of ways that I do it in when I'm creating e-learning. And I would have to say, Lyndall, you've opened my eyes to that accessibility point. But then I look at the audience that I'm also delivering to, and I don't have that diversity challenge there either that is apparent. I'm making an assumption to some degree, but I would be informed also, I'm sure, if there was those diversity challenges there. So, I'm sort of going, I need to explore this deeper and more. I can say that I am in the middle of actually writing an e-learning module about diversity and inclusivity to release to my store network in the very near future, because I see that as a very big part of what they deliver, which is customer service to people that walk into their stores. And they need to not only have, they have to have more than awareness, they have to have a good understanding of it. So I'm quite pleased that I've introduced that, or am introducing that, but it's a really good discussion to have. And as I've been listening to the discussion, my mind is going to a book that was released late last year, which is on topic but slightly off topic maybe, and it's called Caste: The Lies That Divide Us by Professor Isabel Wilkerson. And it actually links the African American community with the Indian caste system, with Nazi Germany as well, and how all of those things interplay. And we're actually all impacted by this caste society across the globe. And I think it it adds another layer to what we're talking about. You know, there are things that are embedded within our society that we're not even consciously aware of at this point. So if anybody's interested, I'd highly recommend, I've only just started it, but highly recommend that book also. Which is not answering your question, Bill, I'm sorry. But
and the thing about it is that the questions are tough. What I actually want to do right now is actually run another poll. And then I'm going to ask Leonie to come on and share some ideas with us. Again, not just for the people in this room, but for everybody that hopefully is going to watch this later on. And in this one here it's a poll about what types of diversity and inclusions have you built into the program. So it goes to my question that we've just been discussing, and it'd be interesting to get individual feedback about what kind of things you've been using in terms of this kind of process. You can have more than one, by the way, in this one. Unless you had none, in which case you couldn't have more than one. Everybody done? So visual graphics. Yeah, visuals, I think, was what we're going to talk about now. Audio. Again, various closed captioning, multimodal, multi-language. Interesting. And other, whoever put the other in, could you share that with us? What is the other one that you've done, just because that's part of our learning process?
I did that. So I wasn't sure whether this was multimodal. I didn't quite know what you meant by multimodal. We do a lot of kinesthetic stuff as well.
Okay. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay,
so body smart.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll have all of these results to share with people as well, that I think they do. But Leonie, one of the things, and you and I have known each other for a long, long time, and visualization is something that's really important. And could I get you to spend a few minutes with us talking a little bit about your own experience, and then the use of imagery and how it can, L&D people might be able to engage with certain audiences using the images approach to things.
Thanks, Bill. And I just want to say again, amazing discussion. I've written loads of notes. I'm particularly loving your quote, was it Sonali, about compassion rather than caution. And I know having conversations, look, it feels like 2020 brought us a whole lot of stuff, a lot of challenges, a lot of awareness. One of them during the Black Lives Matter, when that all sort of blew up, I had a conversation with some colleagues and friends and said, you know, we've got to talk about this stuff, we've got to do it. And many of them were saying things like, I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to say it, so I'm going to say nothing. And I think my sense was that exact same thing. It's like we need to come from a place of compassion. So yeah, really appreciate that one. So the CCS cards, are basically a tool, so a set of 53 illustrations, photographs, and words, and any card can mean anything to anyone at any time. So our whole thing, I guess, inadvertently, when we created it, it had an element of inclusion, because the point is that every single person has the same deck of cards, so we're coming from the same space. So we had Dr. Stephanie Burns actually talked about it, and she said it levels the playing field. So many times where people go, I don't feel that I can speak as well as somebody else. So works really well from that, because it's like we have 53 things that are basically, we're using the same language, which is really important. Clearly, as I'm starting to say this, I'm going, it's one tool that we can use to help people express themselves. And obviously it's a visual tool. So already I've excluded some people. So I think the thing coming out of this conversation for me is also, as learning professionals, it's having a whole bag of things in our toolkit. So it's knowing our audience, knowing, you know, as much as we possibly can, and having a diverse range of goodies in our box to do that. In the development of the tool as well, I think what I just want to highlight a few things that have become, you know, for me in terms of diversity and inclusion is even noticing in our product. So our original set of image cards, which, you know, we're known and loved, and we, you know, some people would say to us, you need to change them. Some people say never change them. But we did get feedback that they weren't actually inclusive in some ways. And I used to look through them and go, how can that be? Anyway, we updated the set in 2017 to be more inclusive. And I think we've covered off a lot of range there. So in the images that we use. What else was I going to say? Again, where we use the tool, it's opened my mind to diversity and inclusion as well, because at the end of 2019, I took the tool into aged care. So that opened up a whole lot of different conversations. I'm working at the moment with the men's table. So helping men, you know, have conversations they may not have, or be able to be more open and honest and vulnerable. We did some work in the LGBT community a number of years ago, working with a colleague, and we created a kit called Coming Out, Staying Close. And I just want to read to you some research when we were doing that I came upon that said structured situations designed to promote mutual sharing of experiences and views can lead to an increase in empathy and reduce prejudice. And empathy was something I think Sonali touched on before. So certainly when using the CCS cards, we have a number of processes that we use where it is a structured conversation by nature of being. So, and before I go on, so just another one that I just know recently, and I spoke to Bill about this, that was talking with a colleague about neurodiversity, and she was a lady who had found out at the age of 55 that she was dyslexic. So a mere 3 years going, oh my gosh, now I know what's different. So we're now talking about, okay, so how can we use the images and the image cards to help in that space as well? So I think as learning professionals, we know that, whatever we can set up to create a room that has a safe space and brings everybody into that to feel included in whatever way we can, that's really important. So using something like the cards can help people do that. So as I said, immediately, we're all talking the same language. We create a space for equal voice. Again, I don't know, certainly in the gender research, they show that women are spoken over, over the top of how many times. So if we've got a process where we know everybody's going to get to have a turn, even just from like introverts versus extroverts. So giving them a tool like the CCS cards where we get a chance to reflect before we speak helps people feel safe and comfortable to be able to share. So it enables the introverts to do what they do best, which is think, say, think, and the extroverts to think before they say, but also the extrovert satisfies them because they go, oh, I know I'm going to get a chance to speak. So it's, it's okay. Another word that has come up a lot during this conversation is curiosity. And again, using something like the cards. So one of the processes that we use whenever we do it, we will frame a topic and then say, make your choices and place your cards face down. And what I love about that is that you just see this heightened curiosity. So encouraging people to come from a place of curiosity and non-judgment is so important, again, in how we, in including every single person. So it's like, oh, I wonder what they're going to say. Another piece is look, innately, we're probably not very inclusive. Our DNA is like, we like people who are like us. We can't help ourselves. So again, if we can provide opportunities that show how do we connect and how are you like me, the better we're going to be. So again, that we find it using the vision cards, because we all have the same set of cards, often we'll find people go looking across the table going, oh my God, I chose exactly those same images. An example was on my Unpack session last week. I had two people, couldn't be more different visibly. So we had one male, one female, one looking like they came from an Asian background, one coming from a European background. That was just surface level what I saw. I don't know what their neurodiversity was as well, but they had a conversation together. They chose exactly the same two cards. They came out of the conversation going, oh, we're twins. Like, how cool is that? So again, if you can create times where people go, oh my gosh, so now I have a connection with you. I feel like I can be more open, I can be more compassionate, I can be more vulnerable, and we can do the good work that we need to do. I think I'll stop there and just see if there's any questions or thoughts or comments on that.
One of the questions that I put together, I guess, around the end of this thing is, what can we do as learning and development professionals to, you know, embrace, understand, but embrace diversity and inclusion. And I know just on my own experience, when I first left big business and went out on my own, I wanted to make sure that I was able to deal or understand more. So I went ahead and did things like the Myers-Briggs type indicator and became a facilitator of that, not because I wanted to facilitate it, but because I wanted to be able to understand it and pull things together. Similar things with language. When you learn language and you go to places like Israel, for instance, and understand the cultures of various things. When the image cards came out, I grabbed them right away, and you've been using them for 20 years because they were a good tool. And I think one of the things we can do as L&D professionals is learn and apply and look always around for things. And that's where, Lyndall, your stuff about, you know, accessibility to things and in e-learning, it's going to be so important to stay ahead of the game now with engaging these kind of things. So before I ask the last biggest question of you, where you're all going to have a 10-second answer to, anything else that anybody wants to add about what we're doing in this last 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes that we have together, about what we might want to do and how we might embrace it?
Can I just add something, Bill?
Yeah.
Because I think something that when I was thinking about using the CCS, but also just in terms of diversity and inclusion, I think it's about understanding who is in the room, which I know as learning professionals, that's, you know, that's almost 101, isn't it? That we go, who's our audience? Who are we talking to? So in terms of, if we're thinking about leaders and managers of teams, or just even people in a team, it's any opportunity we have to understand each other a little more. So I think it's, how do I see myself? What's my identity? And we can certainly ask topics around that. And also, what do I need to thrive? So that's a topic that, you know, if we're trying to work together, what is that? I think that's a question. So no matter what we physically look like or what's going on behind the scenes, what do you need personally to thrive? So when we're designing our programs, just taking that into consideration as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think then there's so many different things that we can do, can't there? I was just thinking about other ways that we can embrace this stuff. A course that I was on one time where people wanted to share stories that began with saying, choose a song that you'd like to speak to. And so you play the song and then you speak to that. Other ones, of course, are image collages, which we see a fair bit of, or Imagineering activities. So there's audio things, there's things like that. Does anybody have anything else that they use in particular that they would recommend an approach to using?
I think to pick up on what you're talking about there and what Leonie mentioned, I only gave, some young person asked me, does confidence come with years and that type of thing? I said a little bit, but mainly for me, it's meeting everyone that's going to be in the training session before I start. I said that just, you connect, because you'll know the content and that reduces the nerves. And then I think it goes to what Leonie was saying with understanding who your audience are. And sometimes it's just about, a quick way to do that is to meet them all individually for 2 or 3 minutes or 30 seconds before you deliver your classes. That's helped me.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I use the CCS cards for in almost all my things, is putting out the deck on chairs and say, pick a chair that you like, and then get to speak to that for 30 seconds and things like that. So, David, you were going to say something, I think.
We use sociometrics a lot. And so either a line as a single spectrum or 2 axes in terms of stuff. And so people walking around, listening to their body to say, where do I, what works for me? And then talking to the person next to them.
Yeah, great. Anyone else before I ask the final big question? All right, here it comes.
Well, I think Shirley shared something in the chat.
Did you? Okay, let's have a look.
I'm not sure if she's not able to speak up on the audio, so just saying.
Different types of photo cards. Yeah, I encourage value and diversity perspectives as part of the learning tool. I think image is so important in so many different ways, whatever approaches you use, just cutting things out of magazines in order to tell a story, lifescaping, all of those kind of things are really important. Thank you, Shirley. And sorry we couldn't have you involved more in this one, and please come along to some of the other ones we have. So here's the last question, guys. Is it really possible to create and embrace a fully diverse and inclusive Australia? 5-second answers. Ainsley.
Okay, so I had to take myself on mute. I think absolutely yes, and I think from my perspective, from the disability space, it has to be. It's about thinking about not just the investment, so not the expense, but thinking about the investment that. And I don't like talking about money, but unfortunately, that's the biggest barrier. Talking about what the investment is and what the outcome is for those people, for including everyone.
Excellent, Lyndall.
Yeah, I'm an optimist. I think we can do it. I think we can do better. And just if I can do a little plug for a free event that I'm running as part of Geelong Design Week. If you are interested in online accessibility and you want to find out more, I'll put something in the chat, a link for you to sign up and join me for a free event about how to do inclusive online design.
And when you put that up on LinkedIn, tag a bunch of us so we can share it with other people as well.
They will do. Thanks.
All right, good stuff. Sonali, what can we truly create a fully diverse and inclusive society?
I'd like to be an optimist myself. I think I'm more optimistic about controlled environments. And when I say controlled, I mean measurable environments like organizational ones. I have greater hope that we can create fully inclusive and diverse and representative of our population kind of workforces within organizations. And when I say fully, I say it with a little, I say it with optimism, but I think a little tension is welcome as well, because tension and disagreements tell us very valuable information about each other and what we value.
All right, Deb, what do you think?
In my heart, I say yes. In my brain, I say I think we're going to be challenged for a fair while yet.
Fair while yet, yeah. If we talk about timing is the issue, isn't it? Carrie, what's your thinking?
I'm usually the optimist, but I'm going to say not really. I think we're going to strive to be 100%, but I think people's needs are going to change and things like that. So I'd like to see us continually to strive, but as things change, that we evolve. So we don't sort of, say, yep, we're 100% there. I think it's sort of something that we need to keep challenging ourselves and keep exploring, so we have a better understanding across everything.
Look to the 23rd century is what I say.
Yep.
David, what do you think?
Not in my lifetime, sadly, but it's in terms of humanness, if we don't try, then we diminish everyone's humanity.
Yeah, I think we heard that last week. It's a journey, not just the destination, but the destination is still important. Todd, what do you think?
Yeah, great. You asked a closed question there, Bill. So I think my choices are yes and no. So I can't bear to say no. So I'm going to say yes if you've invested in that. So then I'll add to that because I've answered with a yes. Yes, because particularly younger generation, because I don't think you have put a time frame on it from memory.
No.
I look at my sons and their friends, and they're much more down that path than my grandparents and great-grandparents ever were. So that gives me hope for saying yes.
Excellent.
I
Gail?
can't bear to say no.
Gail?
Before the last three answers were said, I'd written down yes, but probably several generations down the track. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but perhaps not in my lifetime, I don't think, unfortunately.
Good stuff. All right, thank you. And Shirley, I don't know whether you can answer or not, but be good if you could. Team, to me, this has just been such an important meetup. And I've learned so very much. And one of the things I always believe in, that if we're going to do something, then get something for ourselves. And I'm just hoping that people will go back and look at this kind of stuff. And Deb, you were talking about rolling something out for your organization. Maybe prep that, watching our 2 sessions as preparation for some of their learning might be a valuable process as well. So I'll throw that into the mix there and say thank you, Ainsley, thank you, Lindo, thank you, Leonie, thank you, Sonali, thank you, Todd and Gail and David and Shirley and Deb and Carrie. Carrie, do you want to close us out?
So grateful that my workmen have gone so I can talk. I just want to thank everybody so much. Unfortunately, because of family issue last week, I couldn't attend the session, but I watched the recording, and so if anybody else gets a chance to watch that, and I thought today's was great. So I really want to thank firstly the panel for your insights and sharing your knowledge about this topic. I want to thank all the participants today for being very inclusive and sharing their stories and their experiences. And I also want to thank Bill, as usual, for being a perfect host. So really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us this week or this fortnight, and we hope to see you at future masterclasses where we sort of try and support all learning development professionals, not just our members, but the whole community. So thank you again. Wishing you well. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks, Bill. Lovely.
Thank you.